You ever sit down to write and your mind just goes blank? Maybe you type a sentence or two, but lose momentum right away. Then you pick up your phone, you scroll and scroll and scroll, just to avoid the big question that popped up in your head. Were you meant to be a writer in the first place? I've been there. I used to believe that writing was a gift, something that people were born with, a blessing by God. But after years of reading and writing and talking to published authors and even spending 2 years during an MFA program to get a master's in creative writing, I am now convinced that writing is a skill like any other skill. When I look back at the past 10 years of me attempting to write, and after publishing a few short stories and even signing a book deal for a children's book, I can name 4 lessons that helped me be confident as a writer and even see my writing suck less. So let's get into it. Lesson number 1 is my perspective on first draft. I used to think that writers would just wake up in the morning and type away, and then they create these magical stories that we read and enjoy. So what I would do, I would think of an exciting idea for a story, and then I would sit down and try to write it. My first draft will take me a few weeks, and by the end of it, I reread what I wrote and I feel depressed about what I wrote. And it's because it sucked. It sounded horrible. The imagination or the story that lived in my head looked totally different from what I was reading on the page. So what I would do is toss it away and move on to the next exciting idea, and so on and so forth. And what I ended up with is a pile of trashy stories. And that process led me to think of myself as a bad writer. And I went back to that old classical narrative of I am just a immigrant. The English language is my second language. I was not even writing with my mother tongue. I came to the States from Yemen when I was a teenager. So my Arabic was not even good enough for me to actually write ghost stories, and I was struggling to learn English. What am I doing? Then I read a book called Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. And this book has a chapter called Shitty First Drafts. And it's basically a argument that regardless who you are, regardless for how long you have been writing, your first drafts are always going to be full of crap. And what you have to do is you have to return to that draft again and again and again. And it almost says that the longer you stay on a draft, or the longer the stamina that you have to return into that crappy draft, the better writer you will become and the better piece you will end up with. One of my MFA teachers used to say first drafts are only for discovery. They are not a definition of what type of writer you are. They're not even the story that you will end up with. They're just the thing that you write in order for you to go back to and take the bits and pieces that are working and expand them and toss the rest. And after developing that perspective, first drafts have become more fun. Not only writing them, but rereading them. I used to hate rereading my writing because it used to be a reminder of how bad of a writer I am. And I hated that because I was passionate about the thing. I'm still passionate about the thing. And I want to be very, very good at it. But now, when I'm writing the first draft, I don't care about grammar. I don't care about whether my sentence structures are different or are the same or whatever they are. My only goal is to sit every day for as long as I can to write or finish whatever that I'm thinking about, the story. So sit down, write over and over again until I feel like I don't have anything to offer to the story. Then step back, take a break, and return to it when I feel like it's time for me to rediscover, reshape the story that I already wrote. And a pro tip that I would offer is that the faster you write the first draft, the more cohesive it is. And the more breaks you take between writing sessions, the less cohesive it will feel and the more time you will spend on the back end when you return to it. Because when you take breaks, the story becomes fuzzy and the characters lose their shape in your head. So it's helpful to stay consistent and do as fast as possible while they're still there developing in your head. Lesson number 2 is my approach to editing or revising. And in the past, what I would do is just fix grammar, sentence structure, and I would miss those things most of the time because English is not my first language. But I never questioned myself about the story itself. I did not take the story, zoom out, look what is the story really about. What are the things that are moving the story forward, and what are the things that are distracting the reader from what I'm trying to say or what the story wants to be. So, and instead of getting stuck in the details, build the foundation of the story first, which is the structure of the story, the flow of the story as a whole. And if I ask you what is your favorite book or novel or even movie, you're not gonna tell me a sentence in that book or in that novel. You might say a dialogue in a movie or whatever the case might be. But in most cases, the thing that resonates with us the most is the feeling that we walk away with when the story ends or somewhere in the middle of the story that we related to. And that comes from the structure. That comes from understanding where the story begins, what's its middle, and where it ends. And I will offer you another book, whether you're a fan of sentences or a fan of the structure as a whole of a story, and it's called The Artful Edit by Susan Bell. This is it. And in this book, Susan Bell explains the difference between the micro and the macro edit. When is it necessary for you to zoom in into the story, and when is it necessary for you to zoom out? It's not like she's saying one is more important than the other, but she is saying that many people like to play with sentences, with grammar, and with the details, and forget about the big picture. And if you start with the big picture, then the small details or the zoomed in details will become easier for you to work with. And for me, what would I ideally do is I would write a first draft, take a break from it, and then I will return to it after a few days, sometimes a few weeks, just depending on how busy I am or how much I want to stay away from the story. And then I would reread it once. I will try as much as possible. It doesn't always work, but as much as possible, do not annotate or make comments or sentence, nothing. Just focus on the big picture. After I read the whole thing once, in the back or in the last page of the story, I will just write what I felt, the thing that stood out, the things that I fell in love with, the things that distracted me from the story. When did I zone out of the story? Things like that, big picture. Then I will go back to read it one more time, and that's when I will go into the sentences, highlighting, cutting, adding commas, and all that thing. But if I'm being honest, those small details, I can even delay them until the third, fourth draft, because as I'm rewriting, I will be fixing them as I go. I always say that editing or revising is like listening to your own voice on camera or on video. It feels awkward and gimmicky, and it's not you, but it's never as bad as you think it is. And it's also most likely not as good as your friends will say it is. Either way, you get better by doing it over and over again. Lesson number 3, which is my reading habits. In the beginning of this writing passion of mine, I used to just read for fun, which is fine. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But reading as a writer is very different than reading for pleasure. Reading as a writer requires a conscious decision of understanding of the decisions that the writer that you are reading for made while writing. And then one day, and I was on vacation, and I don't know why I took a craft book or a book about writing while on vacation, but I did. And I finished it while on vacation. It was like a weekend. And it's called On Becoming a Writer by Dorothea Brande. And it's basically a book on how to become a writer. And there is a particular part on the reading habit thing. And she says, basically in the beginning, while you start reading for pleasure, you have to read the book once for pleasure, for fun. And then you have to go back and read it the second time. And that second time, you read it with marking, taking notes, with the intention to understand the decisions that the writer made while writing it. Why would the character do this and not that? Why would the writer or the author start the story here and not anywhere else? And she claims if you are consistent enough for long enough, you will be able to read the book once with the insight of reading it twice. And there is another book when it comes to this thing about close reading, is by A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders. This is the book. This is literally a living example of how we should be reading, because the book is not just a craft book of an author telling you how to write or what is the right things to do or tips and tricks. None of that. It's literally you will read a story. He focused on Russian literature. You read a story, and then he has notes after the story telling you decisions that the author made and why were they valuable, and what would happen if they had made another decision about a character, about a setting, about a pace, about structure, a lot of things. I think this is a book that's both an insightful book on how to write, but it's also an insight on the practice of reading closely. Lesson number 4 is my vision for writing as a lifelong journey. And I feel like I should have learned this lesson first, but it took me the longest. When I applied to my MFA program, or when I got accepted, I should say, I thought it was the turning point. I will go into this MFA program, I will write my unwritten novel, I will publish it, become rich and famous author. None of that happened. Because in the program, I realized how much work I had to do to get a story right. I graduated with maybe 4 short stories. I used to write 1 short story a semester. That doesn't even make a short story collection. But the lessons that I learned there were invaluable. Then I thought, if I can just publish 1 of those short stories after I graduate, then the discovery, the fame, and the richness will come. And lo and behold, after graduating, maybe in a few months, I posted my first short story. It's online, you can look it up. I think it's called Home is a Holiday in Phoebe magazine. My friends congratulated me. My wife was super happy for me. I showed my dad, he didn't even know what I was talking about. I showed my mom, she's like, what? And that was it. And I woke up the next day and I went to work, came back home, ate dinner, and played with my daughter, put her to sleep, and watch a show. Then I thought maybe I needed to publish 1 more short story. And I did that. And I even got a book deal for a children's book. And what I realize now is that for writers, there is no arrival. There is no a time where you can just, even if you become famous and rich, even if you become whatever dreamy self that you have for yourself, arrival is never there. Because I feel like as a human, our desire is always looking at the other side or what someone else has. One of my writing teachers used to say, you will graduate from this program and you will feel less accountable to your writing than you feel right now. And you might not even feel as excited as you feel about your writing as you are now. But the one thing that you cannot do is stop writing. And I think that's what it comes down to. Writing is not a task. It's not a goal that you can accomplish. It's not a degree that you can have and move on with it or get a job after it. It's something that you do. And you do it for as long as you live. These are my 4 lessons. I would love to know the lessons that you have learned as a writer. The lessons that kept you at your writing desk, writing over and over again for years now. Let me know in the comments below. I will leave the link for all of these books in the description. In the meantime, salam.